So, welcome everyone to day one of our MPP for Implementers training. Okay, so our training is going to begin shortly. We have a little question for you all, a little warm up. So in agriculture, what is the technical term for the raising and keeping of bees? You can answer in the chat. Anyone have any guesses? Okay, I'm gonna provide the answer. I don't think anyone has any guesses. The answer is apiculture. Um, and a bonus fun fact, bees can see all colors except red. Okay, so we do want to just mention that this material was funded by USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and that this institution is an equal opportunity provider. So in this training, let's go over the big picture for the MPP training. Over the next 3 Zoom sessions, our goals for you as implementers in training are to understand how to apply a trauma-informed approach to food security settings, learn practices for supporting pantries with technical assistance, training, and resources through the Nutrition Pantry program. And this includes the processes, tools, and resources that you will need to implement this program in your community.
All right, everyone good? Michelle,
We break up our training into 3 sessions, each offering a different but important review of key content, MPP process and resources, and the opportunity for individual and group reflection. Oh, sorry. So, just a little housekeeping. We are going to use Mentimeter today. Um, so you can either use your phone to scan or you can go to menti.com and then you can put in the code that we'll provide. We encourage you to unmute and share answers or experiences. And then we also encourage you to have your cameras on if you can. Gentle reminder to also take care of yourself. If you need to get up and stretch, grab some water, whatever you need to do. And we will be recording this because for anyone who needs to make up the session or if it's a resource you want to come back to. So just be aware of that. And we're going to have Leah introduce herself.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at today. I'm one of your training facilitators. My name is Leah Quinn. I am a senior program manager here at Leah's Pantry. I've been with Leah's Pantry for 6 years now. I'm not the Leah of Leah's Pantry. I'll add that. It can be kind of confusing sometimes. I have a personal and professional background in food banking and nonprofit and community building work. I have worked deeply with the Charitable Food Network for my entire career at Leah's Pantry, and I love applying this TI lens to our programming. So I'm really excited to be here. The fun things about me that are non-professional are, I'm based in Southern California. I spend a lot of time on the water. I live on a sailboat full time with my family. So we love to take it to Catalina and out sailing. I love trying new food. You can see some grasshoppers I tried in Mexico City in November, and I don't think I will have grasshoppers again, but I was happy to have tried them, and they are pretty good in guacamole, I'll say. It's a good way to eat them. And then I have a 2-year-old daughter as well. So I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you throughout this training.
Colby.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Colby D'Onofrio, and I'm a training specialist here at Leah's Pantry. I've been at Leah's Pantry for almost 4 years now, and I, a lot like Leah, have a background in food banking, and I got my degree in health sciences with a nutrition concentration. When I'm not working on trainings, I'm an avid lifter. I love to be in the gym. I live in the Bay Area of California with my fiance and our orange tabby cat named Persia, who might make an appearance if she gets too needy during this training. And I'm also an avid traveler. I haven't had a chance to update these photos, but I just got back from Japan a couple weeks ago where I was skiing. And I've also traveled to a lot of really wonderful, warm places. So I'll pass it over to Amy to introduce herself.
Okay, hi everyone. Here at Leah's Pantry, I've been here actually just past my 2-year mark. And I'm a senior project coordinator, and I work with a lot of different teams here at Leah's Pantry. Um, I also have a background as a registered dietitian and used to work with people managing diabetes. Like Colby said, I also really enjoy traveling. I'm originally from New Jersey and now I reside in San Diego. And I really love my rescue dog, Leo. You can see pictured there, and I try to take him traveling with us as well. So we are really excited to start this conversation about taking a trauma-informed approach to food distributions, which is a key feature of the Nutrition Pantry program. But I want to recognize that this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation. Anytime you start talking about how trauma impacts our communities and what we can do to respond to it, know that this is a journey and not a checklist and just the tip of the iceberg. All right, so we're going to be talking about the meaning of food and life. So hopefully you all had a chance to complete the questionnaire that was in the online course. And the purpose of this questionnaire is to learn about how food fits into the different parts of our lives. So you'll notice in this image that there are 5 domains that demonstrate the way that we create meaning and value around food. So the first one that we have is aesthetic. And this refers to the way food looks, how it's presented and displayed. And then there's social, which touches on how food might connect you to your culture or community. And then there's the health domain, representing nourishing the body and mind with food. We have sacred, which represents how food feeds the soul, which can be connected to religion or other cultural traditions. And lastly, we have the moral domain, which represents the greater impact that your food choices might have on other people and the environment. These are some concepts that you might not have considered previously. So, hopefully, after this discussion, you'll walk away with a better understanding of food's role in your life. You might be wondering why this exploration of the meaning of food in our lives is important or relevant to our topic today. When we consider our relationship to food in so many different ways, it's easy to see how food habits and cultural traditions are very connected to all aspects of our life. Food is not just something that we eat for our health or something to keep our bellies full. It actually has a lot of meaning, and that meaning takes many forms across individuals, communities, and cultures, and may change a lot throughout our lives as well. So many times when we're working on projects that aim to increase food security or increase healthy diets, we forget how connected food is to all parts of our life. So if you took the survey online, then you might already know whether you scored high on social, for example, or another area. But now let's take a minute to think about what has shaped your relationship with food over the course of your life. What kind of things happened in your life that resulted in this relationship that you have to food? Think about how you learn to eat and cook, what you eat now, how you shop, who you eat with, and how you prepare food. Is food a meaningful part of your day, or is it just something that needs to happen, but you don't really give it much thought? And that can change throughout the day too, or the week, or the month. And there's no wrong answers here. The goal is just to do some self-reflection on our next mentee. So again, we have another mentee. It's the same code as the last time, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that. When I did this, I believe I showed up with social, like eating with other people is really important, and then also moral, and how our food choices affect others. They are very important to me. I connect food to social events and I cook for them because they are important. Definitely. Aesthetic. I prepare the meals in my household and I always want them to look as good as they taste. Health. I'm a nutrition grad and RD to be. That is exciting. So I try to create nourishing and filling meals. My high domains were aesthetic and health. I love how we can make works of art with food and how creative chefs can be. Health because food is medicine. Yes. Health and social were my top two. I pack my lunch so it's healthy. I share food often with family and friends. Health and social. I try to keep neighbors access food that fit their needs while eating healthy, fresh, and local. Yes. And I think like a lot of these can also um, overlap too. I ranked high in health. Eating healthy food was a priority with my mom. We didn't have a lot of junk food and sweets. You needed to ask. So this carries into my adult life. Yes, definitely the way you grow up and eat can have an impact as an adult. Social, cooking and eating with my family. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people have social, health, and aesthetic as their main ones. Well, thank you everybody for participating. It looks like some of the answers are slowing down. We have one more. Health, I enjoy eating nourishing food that makes me and my body feel good. Moral, I am vegetarian and think a lot about where my food comes from and how food systems can be more sustainable. Yes, I can relate to that one as well. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I'm now going to pass it on to Colby.
All right. So Amy covered our the importance of how we have different relationships with food. And before we dive into our next section, I just want to tie this back into how this relates to us working in the charitable food network, wherever we might be in this network. Sometimes food just becomes calories. It just becomes pounds in, pounds out, and it can feel very transactional. But as this image shows, we have a lot of different ways that we relate to food, and that's how food makes meaning in our lives. Just like we have that for ourselves, the people we serve also have a relationship to food. And when we are able to provide food and provide an environment around food that helps cultivate and nourish that meaning around food, it helps people feel fully seen. It connects them to their culture, their background, their previous experiences. So the way that we can talk about food beyond just calories, input, output can actually be protective, it can be healing, it can breed positive relationships, and it helps create a space where people are fully seen. So that's why we talk about this. It's fun to know it for ourselves, but it's also important to understand how the meaning of food in our lives is similar or maybe different too to the meaning of food in the lives of the people we serve. And so, with that, I feel like it's a nice segue to dive into trauma informed nutrition security because we're going to take it just one step further and talking about how we serve the people we serve and how we understand the life that they live or may have lived. So, we're going to jump back onto Mentimeter. Again, open up this, it'll be the same slides that we had last time. So let me pull it up on my end and get this one going. Okay, yep, great. I'm going to drop a link in the chat as well. Leah, did the participant link in the agenda, did that get updated or is that still the old one?
Agenda might be old. I updated your slide link.
Okay, I'm going to use the old one in this case because we still have the same code here on this slide. Or is that QR code the new one?
The QR code's the new one, and the code's the
Okay.
new one. Everything on the slide is updated. Now I'll put the participant link in the chat box.
Okay, that would be awesome. All right, let me grab this real quick. There we go. Okay, move this guy over here. Here we go. Let's start this. Might take me back to the beginning. There we go. All right. So here's the question. How would you define trauma? We're going to talk about a trauma-informed approach. So we got to dive into what does trauma mean. All answers are anonymous here. So take a moment and respond to how would you define trauma? An event that has a long-term effect on your life and choices. An event that affects an individual, could be something big or small. A negative experience that can impact all areas of your life. Intense experiences in your life that show up later on. Trauma is a negative experience that has affected us or is currently affecting us in some way. Trauma is universal. Oh, I think someone may have taken Aaliyah's pantry training before. What I'm seeing here and what I think is really on point that all of y'all are getting at is that there's an event or an experience that happens that then has an impact on us down the line. It's greater than just that event. Childhood events and events that are carried into adulthood. Absolutely. Let me exit this. Thank you for your responses here. I think we're all really on the same page. I'm hoping that the videos in the online course set everyone up with a good foundation. I'm seeing that here. So I think we're going to be able to breeze through this section. We're going to dive just a little bit deeper into trauma and adverse experiences. But I think we're all in a really good starting place. So thank you again so much for those responses. So we're going to explore trauma, but also adversity and resilience. And again, here comes the question. What is trauma? But don't worry, sit back, relax. This time, I'm going to do the talking. So at Leah's Pantry, we like to explain trauma using the 3 E's: the event, the experience, and the effect. Now, trauma can begin with an event that is stressful, difficult, or scary. It might be a single event like a death or a natural disaster, but it also could be a series of prolonged events like poverty or food insecurity or neglect. Now, whether an event is traumatic really, really heavily depends on how we experience it. And this can vary based on our previous life experiences, the environments we're in, our genetics, the social supports around us that enable us to handle or not really handle that event. Now, all of those 2 things together result in the effect. It's important to remember that trauma is a neurobiological effect. Neuro meaning brain, biological referring here to our bodies and the biology and physiology of our bodies. So what this means is that trauma is something that happens in the body, the nervous system, and the brain of someone who experiences that event in the way that causes lasting trauma. So let's break this down just a little bit further. We're going to start with the event. When we talk about the events that can result in trauma, another way we might refer to them are adverse events. Because remember, it depends on how a person experiences an event that dictates whether or not it becomes traumatic. So no event is inherently traumatic. That event, however, is adverse. Adverse meaning challenging, difficult. And it can be pretty broad, right? So in this graphic here, we have a variety of different events that can happen in someone's life, and we can group them into three categories. There's the household, so things that affect us very closely, very personally in our close inner circle. Then we have our community, so one step out, the things that are happening around us, but pretty immediately around us. And then we have our greater environment, so the big environment. And this can be things like in the environment as big as natural disasters. So take a moment here, look through some of these, both in the household, the community, and the environment. Look at the items and the events on here. Some of these might surprise you. Some of these might be like, yeah, I would imagine that would be a really difficult event that would be categorized as adverse or maybe even cause trauma. So do any of them surprise you? We have some that we call loud traumas, right? Or loud adversities or crises. These are things like abuse, neglect. These are things that the world readily recognizes as challenging and probably life altering. Think about if you were to tell someone you went through this, they would probably go, oh my gosh, like, are you okay? That's really tough. But we also have quiet events, right? Things like microaggressions. Poverty itself is an adverse event, and that can incorporate food insecurity. Things like structural racism or substandard schools. These are things that occur over time. But if you told someone, yeah, I went to a pretty underfunded school as a kid, they're probably not going to go, oh my God, are you okay? However, these ongoing events continuously remind us that the world is not a safe or welcoming place for us, and these can actually be more impactful and prevalent than just one-time big events. And in some ways, these are obvious to food, right? The relationship here to food. Things like lack of access to nourishment, right? Yes, that's definitely going to affect somebody's ability to have a healthful, nourishing diet. But there also might be something like poor water quality, right? If you're not able or don't feel safe to drink the water that comes out of your tap, well, you're going to have to buy water. That's going to eat into the food budget. And, well, soda tastes a lot better and isn't that much more expensive than buying bottled water. So we might see an increase in consumption of sweetened beverages. There's a variety of ways that food and access to food show up in our lives. Again, I want to point out that poverty is listed as an adverse experience here, but poverty encompasses a lot of the things and can be affected by or affect a lot of the other events we see on this page. So food insecurity is inherently usually tied up in other challenges that people are experiencing. I also want to point out that food distributions and food distribution settings can inadvertently be places where people do experience additional stress and adversity because, right, food insecurity is an adverse experience. But there's also some things that go along with it, right? Just not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. That is definitely stressful. And there's a few added layers like stigma, right? I think we all can agree there's a stigma associated with needing to access community resources. And this stigma often causes neighbors to feel shame for needing help, for needing support, or any resources that your site might provide. There also might be a feeling of restriction, right? A food distribution is a place where order and policies have to be maintained, right? We need to have some order so we can have a flow, so we can make sure there's enough for everyone. But this might also create a stressful environment for neighbors who feel like they're being monitored or they're being restricted from taking everything that they desire or need. This feeling of restriction might also accompany the feast or famine cycle. And this is a really interesting cycle that goes way back to our Neanderthal ancestors, that when we don't know when we're going to have our next availability of food and food is present, we stock up on as much of it as possible. Because back in the day, we didn't know when the hunt was going to be successful or when we were going to gather a lot of ingredients. So when we have food, there's this urge to take as much as possible. That might look like overeating. It also might look like taking more than we can actually use, and that food end up going to waste. This, however, is not neighbors trying to be selfish or neighbors trying to take from others. It is this deep, deep urge that we have to stock up so we feel safe and we feel protected from when hunger might strike again. Now, finally, there might be a sense of cultural oppression if a neighbor isn't able to access foods that fit their cultural needs or preferences, or their languages aren't spoken on site. None of these, unfortunately, have easy fix. We are going to talk about how to address almost all of them in this training, but I want to point out just that this does exist. It is not your fault as an individual who is running a distribution. These are just challenges that we have to address as we are running our distribution sites. And when we see them, when we acknowledge them, it makes it a little bit easier to address them, which we'll be doing in days 2 and 3. All right, back to the 3 E's of trauma. So remember, it's not just the event that causes trauma, it also is how we experience it. Now, how people experience an event is often related to what's called resilience factors. So if we're going to talk about how a person experiences an event, we have to talk about and define resilience. Resilience is the process of the body and mind adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, right? So being alive means that we're going to experience challenging things. It's actually important that we do, right? If we think about if we went to run a marathon, right? A marathon's a really hard thing. And if you train really well, you have a great training plan, you take the time to address it, you might do pretty well in that marathon, or you might at least make it to the end, right? If you never train for a marathon, you don't go out on runs, you don't track your times, you don't have an opportunity to practice running, you're going to get to that marathon and it's going to be really tough. You might actually have long-lasting injuries. Our emotional well-being and mental well-being is very similar. We need to experience little challenges so we can practice bouncing back from them. So if we don't experience any challenges in our life, when tough things do happen, we might not know how to cope with them. Additionally, there was some really interesting research conducted by the Hope Center at Tufts with Dr. Christine Bethel. And her research shows that individuals who can identify a wide range of positive experiences being those things that help us bounce back from challenges. When you have a variety of positive experiences in your life, even if you have challenging experiences too, you're more likely to live longer than people who don't have as many positive experiences. So we have to, yes, experience challenging things, but we also have to have positive experiences, supportive people, self-care practices. We'll dive into that in just a minute, but we have to have some buffers around us to help us cope with those challenges, and then we get better at coping with challenges. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this might feel a little overwhelming when we're talking about the people who we're serving in our community, right? You're like, okay, well, I can't jump into people's lives and get rid of all the adversity that they may experience. I'm sure we wish we could, right? If we could rid the world of serious adversity, that would be wonderful. But the truth is that we probably aren't going to be able to do that as an individual and in our lifetime. So if we think here about stress, adversity, scarcity, trauma, those challenges that our neighbors are going through as a rainstorm, we can't stop the rain. However, we can hold up an umbrella. And that umbrella is going to be things like resources, nourishment, positive relationships, community connections, and access to knowledge and sharing of knowledge among our neighbors and among the services that they need. So we think about our food distribution as being the umbrella that we are holding up against the storm of life to help shield our neighbors. We can't stop the rain, but we can put some protections in place to make it a little bit easier. Now let's look at the final E, the effect. I like to think of it this way, is that the event plus the experience ultimately equals the effect that it will have on us. Gabor Mate says, and I think this is a really apt quote, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. Now, I think that this is really important because it points out that trauma is not just something that happens in our head or something, it's not just something we feel, right? Trauma is something that has deep impacts on our bodies as well. And we're going to dive into what that can look like. Oops, excuse me. And first, I want to introduce this idea, this concept of a window of tolerance, because this really helped, at least me, when I first learned about this. And to this day, when I continue to think about the effects of adversity, a window of tolerance is a really great way to frame it. So we all have a window of tolerance, and this was proposed by Dr. Dan Siegel. Now, when we are in our window of tolerance or our window feels wide, right? We feel like we're able to deal with the everyday challenges that occur in our lives. If we think about that experience, right? Remember how having positive experiences around us helps us handle challenges? Well, positive experiences, support, care, etc., helps widen our window of tolerance, which means that we're able to deal with more challenges without getting thrown off kilter. On the other hand, if we have frequent adversity and stress, especially if we don't have those positive experiences to surround us, that's going to shrink our window of tolerance, which means that we have a much smaller window in which we're able to stay on keel in balance. We also can look at our window of tolerance in how it relates to hyperarousal, also known as fight or flight, and hypoarousal. So when we are in our window of tolerance, we are able to be flexible, we're able to be curious and creative. We can relate to other people, we can regulate ourselves, we can plan for the future, and we can solve complex problems. Now, this is all kind of our ideal place to be, right? We're really able to use that higher thinking brain that makes humans unique. When we have a wide window of tolerance, right? Let's say that this lightning bolt here is something like moderately stressful. If we have a wide window of tolerance, and we can assume that our window of tolerance has been widened by having support and care and being able to recover from challenges that we experience, you can see that someone with a wide window of tolerance, they might tend towards fight or flight or down towards fawn or freeze, but they're most likely able to stay within that window of tolerance. So they're able to stay regulated, they're able to stay as their best self, they're able to respond instead of react. If they do get pushed out, it's likely that they're able to return back to their window of tolerance pretty easily. Now, on the other hand, if we have someone who has had a lot of adversity in their life with maybe not a lot of social support and protective factors, they might easily get pushed outside of their window of tolerance. They might get pushed into fight or flight, which emotionally can cause and come off as like anger, anxiety, chaotic energy, hypervigilance, or hyperactivity. And that can be really challenging to experience. It can also be really challenging to interact with as another individual. On the other hand, if someone goes down into hypoarousal, fawn or freeze, they might experience feelings like depression, numbness. They might withdraw. They might feel a lot of shame, be socially disconnected, or have a lack of motivation. Again, these are really challenging feelings to experience and can also be challenging to interact with as a service provider when it feels like you're trying to help someone and they might just not be taking that step or have that initiative to make those next steps happen for themselves. I really want to point out here that this is not a choice that anyone is making to be in either of these states. I think of it on a very, very light and small scale of like if someone jumps out at you from behind a wall and you throw your hands up and maybe scream, at no point did you think, oh, look, there's a threat. I'm going to protect myself and make a loud noise. We just do it, right? And it's the same way when our bodies send us into fight or flight or fawn or freeze. Our brain is detecting a threat, whether that threat is actively happening or it's left over from a previous adversity that we weren't able to heal from. Our body and brain is thinking that we are still in a place of danger and we need to react instead of respond. We might even get stuck in fight or flight or fawn or freeze. And that can be really challenging and really exhausting. There isn't really an opportunity for someone to be in their window of tolerance for an extended period of time, or if they're stuck on or off, they're just always outside of their window of tolerance. Now, this also has effects on our bodies, right? I said that adversity and trauma affects both our brains and our bodies. And so we might see changes in blood pressure, right? When you're really stressed, your blood pressure just sits higher. And so if you're always stressed, it's always going to sit a bit higher. People might have chronic pain or chronic fatigue, right? There might be sleeplessness, there might be problems with digestion, there might be appetite changes. I know when I get really stressed, I have no appetite, and that also makes my blood sugar drop, so I'm also then pushed further out of my window of tolerance. Some other folks are chronic eaters when they're feeling a lot of stress. Neither of these are choices, but these can really affect our relationship with food, right? So we're starting to see how this ties back not only to interactions we might have with neighbors who've experienced a lot of trauma when they come to our distributions, but also how it might impact the foods that they do or don't want to eat. Now, just like neighbors, we also all have our own windows of tolerance. And I think this is something that, it's something that I was talking to my fiance last night. He's been really tired. Work has been really stressful, and he got just like pushed over the edge by something really small. And I literally said to him, "Oh, well, your window of tolerance is really small right now." So I think about windows of tolerance in my day-to-day life, and I think it really helps me address where I am and attune to my emotions. It helps make it a lot easier for other folks too, or to relate to other folks as well. So with that, I want us to go back to Menti, and I want us to take a moment to answer what brings you outside of your window of tolerance and what brings you back inside of it. Get down here and start this presentation. There we go. I will drop, it should be the same participation link as last time, but I will drop this one into our chat just in case that disappeared for anyone. What pushes you more easily into that fight or flight or fawn or freeze response? And then what helps you come back in to that window of tolerance where you can regulate and respond? Someone says lack of sleep takes me outside of my window. Definitely. I think that's one for everyone, right? I mean, there are some people who can operate on very little sleep. I am not one of them. I'm not my best self when I'm out operating on little sleep. Upset in routine or lack of structure are big ones for me. Definitely, right? We feel safe in predictability. What brings me back is doing some active self-care for myself. Exercise, deep breathing, preparing a meal. I love that. Spending time with family, weekends off, and the time outside bring me back in. My window of tolerance changes depending on the day. Sometimes it's something small, like I think a class didn't go well. That can be hard. What brings me back is self-care and taking time for me. An overwhelming schedule, take someone out, and not eating proper meals. There's a lot of variety here, and I think also a lot to relate to. I think every one of these, right? If something doesn't go well for us, especially if we haven't had a lot of sleep, or something changes at the last minute in our schedule, or we haven't been able to eat very well that day, that class not going well can really throw us off. But then things also like making a good meal for ourselves, getting that good rest, being around people we love, who we trust, who help us feel a sense of calm, who we can talk about our challenges with, that can bring us back in. Familial demands combined with lack of self-care. I'm loving that we're talking already about self-care because we are going to talk more about that, and the importance of that, because self-care is really key to keeping our window of tolerance wide, bringing ourselves back in, etc. I want to point out too that a lot of these things that we're listing here are things that the people we serve are also likely going through, right? None of this is like extreme out of our realm of possibility. If someone around me or myself is being mistreated, right? That's a tough one. When I have too much work and new things are added with little time, this can shorten my window. Going out for my morning walk can change my mindset and ability to confront difficulties. All of these are things that I know I've experienced that have pushed me outside of my window of tolerance. And all of these are things that I have been able to do as well to bring myself back in. So just like we all have our own relationships with food and the meaning of food in our lives, and just like the neighbors we serve also have their own relationship with it, the same thing goes for our windows of tolerance. However, our windows might inherently be larger or smaller depending on how much adversity, how that balance of adversity and positive experiences has weighed out in our lives. All right, we're going to take it back just for a couple more slides in this section. Thank you all for answering. It's really nice to get to know you all a little bit more. And I hope you saw some things on the screen that were like, oh yeah, that too. So to close out this section, I want to point out, why do we talk about a trauma-informed approach? Why is it beneficial, and why is it important that we at our distributions adopt a trauma-informed approach? Well, this is a prime example of what's called the curb cut effect, and this was a concept coined by policy expert Angela Blackwell. The curb cut effect exemplifies how addressing and making accommodations for the disadvantages or exclusions experienced by one group of people actually creates an environment that benefits everybody. So the graphic you can see here on the screen shows how sidewalk ramps or curb cuts, which were designed for people who use wheelchairs, also benefits people pushing strollers or carts or riding bikes or wheeling luggage or even just walking and running when you have less of a tripping hazard. By implementing a trauma-informed approach or care, this can mitigate the effects of adversity and trauma by those who have experienced it, but it also creates a ripple effect that promotes safe and supportive environments for every neighbor, every client, program participant, volunteers, and staff. We don't need to address or diagnose people's adversities. In fact, I don't think we should. However, we can create environments where they feel safe enough to show up as their authentic selves. There is no one checklist for a trauma-informed approach, though, and this can feel challenging. A trauma-informed approach is more of a mindset. And there are, however, questions that we can use as guiding questions to tune in and get in touch with how we are implementing a trauma-informed approach. We can ask, what can we do to reduce stigma, shame, confusion, and tension? How can we promote confidence, dignity, and joy? How can we inspire a compassionate and flexible relationship to our bodies, each other, and our material lives, like food? And finally, what can we do to foster other protective and healing practices? So that was a lot. I invite you to take a deep breath. Hopefully, that is sinking in. And I am going to pass it on over to Leah to talk about beginning with ourselves.
So we all, there's a lot of health educators here, folks in community work, distribution work. We all know that sitting for too long is bad for you. So before we get to our content, let me go back one slide. We're going to start with just a really quick stretch break. Always feels nice in the middle of a training when you kind of been sitting, you realize you have like the training slump after a while to just reset our bodies. So you can stand or sit. I'll stay sitting since I'm about to be presenting. But basically, we're going to do a coconut stretch together. I actually love this stretch. And when I supported staff and volunteers out of food distribution, I always thought this would have been such a good stretch to incorporate as like a little warm up or, something to do kind of before a shift, something like that. So basically just spell coconut with your body. So kind of lean over, make a C, arms up above, stretch up for the O, lean over again, C, back up, O, and is kind of just falling forward. U, arms up again. T, either side of the wall, right? Kind of either direction in your room. Let's do it one more time. So just C, O, C, O, N, U, T. All right, perfect. That felt great. So with that, Colby did a great job of really going through and emphasizing all the signs of stress and adversity that we might see in ourselves or our communities, right? And we're doing that because today is all about building that understanding of a trauma-informed approach and what that means and how we can embed it in ourselves and our programs. Now, a lot of aspects of this approach you're going to see are incorporated in the Nutrition Pantry program, but I want to end today by really thinking about relationships and attitudes and beliefs. And I think that, especially as you roll out NPP, this is one of the most important keys to success with this program is really to lean into the relationships you already have or the ones that you are trying to build, right, through this program. So what are the steps we can take to move towards programming that's really about positive relationships? That's about building a beautiful food distribution space using, our skills and our staff and volunteers and partners. So we're going to start with really thinking about how we can bring some attitude shifts and changes within ourselves so that we can show up, and really lead with human connection and authenticity. That's a huge part of a TI approach. It starts with us and what we are bringing to the work that we do. So 3 tools I want to cover for the rest of today are attunement, regulation, and reframing, all critical for effective community-based work. So we're going to start with attunement and self-regulation. Now, we oftentimes lump attunement and regulation together. We're obviously talking about it in one section, but they do have slightly different meanings. So let's just kind of touch down on that for a second. So attunement is being aware of your emotional state. It's kind of being aware like, oh yeah, where am I today? Did I bring, my best self? Do I have a really small window of tolerance? Is it pretty wide open? I'm in a good place. So attunement is that awareness. Now, regulation is the ability to manage emotional responses. So we have regulated, meaning I can manage those emotional responses. We have dysregulated, meaning unable to easily manage emotional responses. What does this have to do again with kind of this TI approach? This is really important to have a good understanding of this. So essentially, we're saying that dysregulated folks really can't be in service of others. So we create a lot of safety and trust by just showing up as regulated and attuned as we are able to. When we do that, we're better able to nurture others and those relationships we have with staff, volunteers, and community. And again, that's such a bedrock of success in community-based programs like the Nutrition Pantry program. Now, this all contributes towards this bigger idea of like dropping a pebble in the pond and seeing the ripple effect. So we bring our best self, our attuned and regulated selves, because we think that's going to create an environment where it's easier to connect and respond to the needs of those around us. And then what's the ripple effect from that? Well, we hope to see, stronger communities ultimately, stronger environments. But really at the center of any community is the individual people who make it up. This can be hard to do, especially in a distribution environment, right? So I've been there, a lot of us in this room, whether you're either supporting these types of sites, a food banker, nutrition educator, or actually running a food distribution, there's a lot of risks for folks who are kind of in public service. There's compassion fatigue, and that really shows up as like, I'm starting to feel kind of numb to something that used to make me feel so passionate. Why do I now feel an indifference? That's compassion fatigue, and it's pretty common actually. Vicarious trauma, so that can be overly identifying with maybe one of your participants or neighbors' trauma that they've experienced. So kind of hearing that story, especially I think, we're familiar with the idea of being empathetic. I think people who identify as being really empathetic maybe are at a greater risk of that vicarious trauma, kind of not able to separate someone else's story from their own, and they end up taking that burden on themselves. Moral injury. I think this is common in food insecurity and social service settings because the system we're working in, that can really impede your ability to care and to offer services. Sometimes you have something you want to do, but institutional constraints or what you receive from the food bank or who your partners are or things outside of your control make it impossible to do what you feel like that neighbor needs. So that can result in someone feeling moral injury. I want to do more, but I'm constrained and can't. And that's a tough tension to hold. There's, of course, culture and burnout, and just those dynamics as well. So that's also why we think it's really important to have an open dialogue about regulation and attunement, right? It helps us do our work more effectively, but it's also just important for the work that we're doing. So, self-attunement and awareness. Where can we begin? Begin by just checking in with yourself, right? So, 3 simple questions. How am I feeling in my body? What are the thoughts in my head today? Do I feel present? Do I feel kind of dissociated? What's my emotional state? So, just checking in, asking yourself with curiosity and compassion a few questions about how you're feeling is important. So, some specific actions you could take, if maybe you do need to attune prior to that big in-person meeting with your, program participant for the first time, or the site you're going to take through this program, or a neighbor who tends to kind of, maybe activate you a little bit and frustrate you. You can take a breath. You can remember to stay aware of your surroundings, your presence. And you can ground, and grounding is really, doing something like a stretch, like the coconut stretch is really useful for grounding, kind of just feeling your physical body and where it is in relation to a space. So I have one more kind of nice little tool that I like to use. So you have coconut stretch, and now you can say stop as well. So hopefully you're not yelling that at someone, stop. Right? Something you can think internally. It is a nice little tool for kind of grounding and resetting. So the first one is just that sit stand. Am I sitting? Am I standing? It's that noticing your presence, just kind of like grounding, feeling where you're at in the room. T, take a breath. Feel it going through your nose. Exhale. Okay, then observe your surroundings. Again, it's reorienting yourself. What do you see around you? What do you hear? It's that awareness piece. And then P, feeling that presence once more in the room. So now, once again, kind of notice your position, think about where you are spatially in relation to others. So stop, keep that in your back pocket. It's a really great grounding tool. Now, self-attunement is an important piece when we're talking about mindfulness and bias. And we're going to talk about bias even more with reframing. So bias is an implicit bias is an unconscious attitude or perception, and it's often negative, right? It's about a group of person or people. Our brains are constantly categorizing. It's what kept us safe a long time ago, right? But now the brain still does it. It's always trying to associate someone with qualities. They're part of this group, they're part of that group. These are my associations about each of those. This is kind of a knee-jerk reaction that we all have, right? That's why it's called implicit. So mindfulness, awareness, attunement, it's a really powerful tool for developing some sense of self-awareness, and that can help us have greater cultural humility. Really important, of course, when we're in a space with other folks, and especially, very diverse demographics like a food distribution. So mindfulness is a great tool because it helps us be less reactive and more responsive. You're in a customer service role, whether you're a direct community provider or just offering support to providers, that is a customer service role. So we want to focus on being really responsive, less reactive, less judgmental, aware of where our assumptions and our biases are. So cultural humility, like I said, we can bring awareness to our biases, and that helps us be more culturally, practice more cultural humility, I'll say. So in a food distribution space, you have cultures, you have different languages, you have different food ways, right? Even thinking about, how everyone has such a different connection to the meaning of food in life. And a lot of that has to do with where you were raised and what type of food you grew up eating. So cultural humility is simple. It's about being open to learning about other cultures, being respectful of other people's beliefs and values. It requires self-reflection, openness, letting go of assumptions, asking and listening. So when we practice cultural humility, we start with an examination of our own beliefs and our own identities and really kind of recognize what are the power dynamics I'm bringing to a situation. Then we lead with that curiosity and compassion, and that really helps us kind of approach without many assumptions. So that was attunement and self-regulation. And now let's move on to our last tool of the day, which is reframing. Now, reframing is a really useful tool for understanding trauma and adversity, to understand challenging behaviors, to understand ourselves more compassionately. It helps us set aside assumptions. It helps us have a better response to things that we're commonly seeing. And we're going to talk specifically about food distribution settings. So we're always invited to reframe in a food distribution setting, reframe our own actions, reframe a neighbor, a volunteer's behavior, someone's attitude. You're working with so many different people and so many different personalities. So there's a lot of opportunities to reframe. At least that's my personal experience. So how do you reframe? It's pretty easy. So there's 3 steps. One is pause. So the first aspect of reframing is really let's stop our judgments and assumptions. We all have these. We just talked about implicit bias. They are present. It's a normal part of human evolution, but let's acknowledge we have them and try to stop them in their tracks. Let's get curious. So what is it that they say in our customer service training? Get curious, not furious. I always think of that phrase. I love that one. Examine your assumptions and bias, right? Be the inspector of your thoughts. What was I thinking? Was I making an assumption about a person or a situation or an action? Did I have anything to provide that assumption other than just my own beliefs and background and experiences, right? It's an interesting thing to really start to examine where our thoughts are coming from. And then again, you lead with that same sense of compassion and openness that you do when you're practicing cultural humility. So is there another explanation for this behavior? Okay, I'm going to have you guys do a little chat box in a second, and then we're going to go back to Menti. So just kind of maybe open that up, be prepared. So let's talk about it a food distribution. So we're all working in or supporting food distribution spaces. So this is a really helpful tool to apply there. So a good example that anyone who's been in a food distribution setting, I think, has experienced is, maybe you have someone drive up or drive through your distribution. They have a really nice new luxury car. So pretend in this case that you're supporting a food distribution and maybe the volunteer next to you sees this nice car come through and they say something like, what is that person doing here? They obviously don't need this service. They're taking advantage of us. So how could you help that person reframe? Let's go to the chat box first. So add in what else could be going on? There were a lot of assumptions being made about the driver of this car. How could you offer a different story for why someone would have a nice car but still be needing a food distribution? And you could unmute as well if you're comfortable with that, but go ahead if you want to use the chat box. Francis says they could be giving a person a ride. Absolutely. See that constantly, right? A lot of people actually don't have access to a car and they rely on friends and family. Yeah. Or maybe the driver, it is their car and they just recently lost their income and now they're unemployed and they don't have a stopgap. They don't have savings. Chandra says they borrowed the car. Exactly. Seen that a lot myself as well. I'll give it a couple more moments to see if anyone else wants to offer some reframing.
I'm terrible at typing, so I'm just going to say that I'll say it out
Go
loud.
ahead, Amy, please.
It could be like they could be recently unemployed, or maybe they had to get a new car, and this is the best thing that worked in their budget. Like I recently had to get a new car, and loan wise, for the percentage, it was better for me to get the newer car than an older car. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Amy. Yeah, someone else said that they've been borrowing the car, right? There are so many reasons that we've probably seen either from our own experience or from ourselves, like Amy shared, right? It's like they're borrowing a car, they're picking up on behalf of someone. They've recently been unemployed. It's a rental car, right? Like there are so many things here. And you don't have to get to the bottom of the situation in this case when you reframe, but it's just a really helpful tool to remember that we're always being faced with situations that we're probably bringing a lot of assumptions to. And so you can offer a different set of assumptions, ones that lead with a little bit more of that compassion, curiosity, right? That's a more trauma-informed approach to take to these situations. Let's reframe some more food distribution behaviors. These are things that we ourselves have experienced working food distributions, or we've heard from our community that they have seen as, things that have been described as difficult or challenging. So let's talk about food hoarding. So that looks like someone who is either taking more than an allotted amount. So maybe you take one can and someone's, trying to put 5 in it. You're having to constantly tell them it's one, that's our rule here. Or going to multiple agencies. So I've seen this too, where it opens up a trunk. Okay, they obviously went to a different distribution. Now they're at this one. So how can you reframe that? And we're going to do this on Menti, so you don't have to put in the chat just yet. Neighbors who are maybe showing aggression, frustration, that I won't say it, but think about that window of tolerance, right? Some of those keywords that Colby had shared: irritated, aggressive, frustrated. Poor willpower. This is interesting. What about judgments that we make if someone chooses processed or shelf-stable food over fresh produce? There's oftentimes a lot of judgments that are made around that, but I think we can really work on reframing it. Frustration, kind of that general bad attitude. So let's hop back over to Menti. I just have to exit the full screen. Okay. So we're going to be on Menti, and if anyone also wants to unmute, please do. We love that. Otherwise, join us on menti.com, and then it's the same code as before, 26942522. So the first one, let's reframe this together. Food hoarding, that person who's quote unquote taking too much food with them or picking up too much food. Okay, sharing. Yeah, maybe I assume they're taking more than they could eat and that's going to go to waste, but maybe they're actually picking up on behalf of neighbors who are housebound. That's a great reframe. In that feast and famine cycle. Yeah. So, people who have experienced bouts of food insecurity, as we discussed, are going to have a biological urge to stock up when it's available because their bodies know there's likely to be another famine, right? So it is something that we can reframe as this is actually expected behavior. This is something that I'm not surprised I'm seeing. Neurodiverse, have mental health issues, things that might make it more difficult to possibly follow written rules or directions. Um, may not know the next time they can leave the house safely. That's interesting. Um, yeah, maybe they have some dietary restrictions. So they're so concerned about getting the food that fits their needs that they just want to get as much as they can because they know I probably won't be able to eat some of this. Yeah, they live really far away. So I live in a city, right? I'm in San Diego, but a lot of our partners are in really rural areas that are food swamps or food deserts, and it can be really difficult to even find open food distributions. No transportation. Great job, you guys. Let's do one more, or sorry, we're gonna do a couple more, but let's move on to the next one. Okay, what about that kind of like reframing of someone who's acting frustrated, acting irritated, acting agitated, their behavior? How can we help reframe this behavior? So maybe what it's kind of helpful to think of what the volunteer next to you says, right? Maybe the volunteer next to you says, this person has such a bad attitude and they're so ungrateful. But what is the reframe here? Low glucose levels. Yeah, that hanger that's actually showing up, right? It's hard to control and stay in that regulated state. Yeah, maybe they came into the distribution after hearing some bad news. I think so many of us are used to just hearing bad news day after day right now that I can really relate to that. They're hungry. Yeah, thinking of this is me on a bad day. I thought of this the other day because I was so short with someone on like a customer service person on the phone for a medical provider. And I felt really bad after it. And I wanted to explain to them, I have been trying to get through. I have been meeting like wall after barrier. No one is listening to me. It's that feeling like I'm frustrated and someone needs to understand. Someone needs to hear. So sometimes we're just the punching bags. And I think that's just something we need to all accept and embrace at times. So yeah, I love it. Outside of their window of tolerance, a lot of stress. Okay, let's keep it moving. We have a couple more that we talked about. So what about this reframing of volunteers? This wasn't on the list, but I think this is an interesting one to think about with the nutrition pantry program because this might come up. This has happened. How can you reframe a volunteer's attitude when they don't want to make changes to their pantry? So you're coming in, you're saying, I have all these great ideas and resources. You are gonna like love what I have to offer. And maybe someone says, I don't want to do that. Why? This is kind of a tricky one, but why might they not want to make those changes other than just they're difficult? They don't like change. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to get to the reframing, right? Is saying, I'm really curious why this person is so hesitant. Anyone else want to posit anything? See if there's a middle ground there. Absolutely. So I'm curious if any of you want to think about that why. So for me, if I, am an implementer and I think of someone who doesn't seem as excited about the changes, yeah. So, okay, so here's some great parts of it. So I think that part of it could be you could offer a reframe of not they don't want to work with me, they're difficult, whatever. I don't like working with this site. I have actually experienced this where then the reframe is kind of, I wonder if, this is just their sense of security and safety, doing something the way that they've always done it. A lot of these staff and volunteers, they've been working these sites for so long, and change is loss. Change means you're giving something up. So I think if we think again about that window of tolerance, when we're in a wide window of tolerance, it's kind of easy to give something up because we might see the benefit we're getting of a change. But if it's smaller, or if we've experienced a lot of loss of safety in our lives and feelings of being unsafe already, maybe we feel like we really have to hold on to what we have control over. Maybe we have to feel like we really have to hold on to the things we've done. So I love how you guys were thinking about that, and then also how would you approach it, which I think is really important. Okay, one more. This one is interesting as well. So, what if that volunteer says, "Oh, this person they don't eat healthy. They never choose anything fresh. They always go for, you know, processed or prepackaged." So is it that they don't care about their health? What else could be going on here that we could help reframe? And this is our last one, so I appreciate you guys giving such great answers and thoughtful. Limited time. Yeah, maybe it's about, hey, I don't have time to, cut the rind off this squash and bake it for 45 minutes in the oven. I love this solution and great tool for NPP, right? Okay, if we're seeing this in action, why don't we give some simple recipes? Maybe they don't have storage, they're eating what they're familiar with, they're going for the higher priced, more valuable items. That's interesting. They just don't know what to do. Maybe if they're unhoused, they don't have access to a full kitchen. Absolutely. All these things I think are great reframes. I mean, there's stability and security again in knowing exactly what something's going to taste like. So I love berries and I get them every single week, but sometimes the box of blueberries is like mealy and gross, and sometimes it's tart and sometimes it's sweet. But a processed food item is going to taste the same every time. So there's either, I don't have the space and capacity to cook this stuff, I don't know how to cook it, or I need that sense of security and safety in something that I know exactly what it's going to taste like. Okay, back to slides. We are almost done for today, you guys, just a couple more minutes. So really great job. So we already did that. We talked about easy ways to reframe. Think about, are people just seeking protection and safety right now? Am I seeing someone outside of that window of tolerance, decreased self-regulation? Am I seeing someone who's looking for predictability and autonomy when choices are limited and there's a lot of bad things going on? All that is kind of like easy back pocket ways to reframe a lot of things that we see at food distribution sites. Okay, so I'm going to move past well-intended tensions, and I am going to move towards our closing. So as a quick review of today and a preview of what's to come, because this is a 3-session training, NPP is a pretty big implementer program, so I want everyone to feel like they have their feet under them of where we're at and what's to come. So what did we go over today? So Amy took us through that meaning of food and life questionnaire, just kind of a fun opening tool. I do believe we have a copy of that questionnaire in our NPP resource library. So sometimes folks have wanted to actually, maybe if they're doing a class or some sort of community event, they use the meaning of food and life questionnaire. So feel free to do that. It's a great conversation starter. Colby took us through trauma and adversity and stress and its impact on us, its impact on how we create programs, and how we create distributions that are protective for our neighbors. We started with ourselves, so some tools and approaches we can take that kind of dive into this TI approach, really built on attunement and relationships and connection and community. So we talked about attunement, self-regulation, and reframing, which are all going to be useful tools to apply to the community-based work that you're doing and the nutrition pantry program work that you'll be doing. So now we're moving away from this trauma-informed approach. Today was all about building that foundation, right? Everyone understanding these are the foundational elements that really make up this program. This is the lens we want to apply, and this is some capacity building around it. Now, the next 2 sections of our live training are going to really just be about the nutrition pantry program, the process, the documents, the procedures, the best practices around it. So you'll kind of see that in action over the next 4 weeks. So with NPP, if you haven't made it into section 2 yet, you're going to learn more about our focus areas and examples of how you can support work at a pantry or a site in each of these different focus areas. So you're going to learn more about nutrition education, pantry policies and procedures, community connections, inventory and waste reduction, cultural and dietary accommodations, and the physical environment of a space. Remember, NPP is for any type of pantry, pop-up, a closet in the back of a school classroom, big client choice shop style model. That's why we have a variety of resources and a lot of flexibility in this program so that you can apply it to all types of sites and works that you're doing. Okay, so with that, we've made it through our first session. I so appreciate all of you for being present and participating and your feedback. We will be meeting again in 2 weeks. So on the 24th, we will see all of you back here in our virtual Zoom room. We're going to be going into day 2, all about the NPP process, recruiting, best practices, and lots of interesting stuff there. So please do complete section 2 so you come in understanding what the tools and resources and the general process is, or else you're going to feel a little bit confused. Reach out to us in the meantime if you have any questions at all. We are available through the course or at npp@leaspantry.org. All right, folks, with that, you're free to go. Hope you have a great rest of your day, hopefully a long weekend for some of you, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.